Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 5th of January 2023. There's an awful lot of content to get through, so I will try and go fairly quickly. We're going to start with airframes and the F-16s. So the Pentagon has said, and this is doing the rounds quite a bit, this bit of news, Ukrainian pilots are expected to complete the F-16 training by the end of 2024. Now, this has made people get a little bit angsty because the idea was, hey, they're supposed to have F-16s by the end of spring. But this, I guess the caveat that needs to be applied is that this is for the US training and possibly doesn't refer at all to what is going on in Europe. So Ukrainian pilots currently undergoing F-16 fighter jet training in the US are expected to complete their training by the end of 2024, according to the press conference. Now, on the other hand, Belgium is sending 2 F-16Bs to Denmark and around 50 people between March and September to participate in the training of Ukrainian pilots. It will involve training not only pilots, but also Ukrainian technicians and mission planners. And of course, it's not that training for Ukrainian pilots in Europe isn't going to finish as soon as one cohort goes through. That's going to be an ongoing thing. So Belgians are helping there. That's good news. I don't know what the latest is in terms of timescale for the training in Europe. The most I guess optimistic date was the end of spring. Actually, we heard it might be pushed a bit further forward than that, actually. But I think realistically, the end of spring is what you're going to see, and that gives you to sort of May time. Thing is, if you rush training through, then you will get pilots flying F-16s who are not optimally trained. And that's the challenge. Do you rush them to the front line to get the usage of the F-16s expedited at the cost of training, or do you wait until you have better trained pilots who can operate in 2s, 3s, 4s together more skillfully? I don't know the answer necessarily. There will be a trade-off there. Breaking as well. So the Pentagon has said. So Pentagon said quite a bit. That's coming, I think, from Pentagon or the White House, but they have answered this Newsweek article that has gone around saying that, and I've seen this, I didn't report on it myself because I was like, not too sure about this. Sometimes I hold back on certain things. And incidentally, talking about holding back, I did actually let you into a rumor going around that Gerasimov died in the strikes in Crimea. I think that was the provenance of those claims is pretty dubious. So when I said take it with a block of salt, and I did say it was very low probability of being true, I would almost certainly discount it. But anyway, onto this claim. So the claim from Newsweek was that there were loads of ATACMS that were going to be, or at least the claim that came out from many others about that Newsweek article, was that there are all these ATACMS that are going to be destroyed, and those destroyed ATACMS could be sent to Ukraine. What's going on? And lots of people getting up in arms about this. It's easy to get up in arms about stuff without thinking, hang on, chill out. Let's see whether that's actually what's going on here. I think very often we need to be more skeptical. Well, the Pentagon has said that the article claiming that expired ATACMS will be destroyed is false. That unequivocally that is not the case. They're not going to, and surely the US Army would be, or the Pentagon would not do things like this. They're not going to be destroying things that could be sent to Ukraine just because that's on their schedule. They've got strategies in place, and they want to help Ukraine as much as possible. It comes down to what's going on in Congress to some large degree. But yeah. Germany, on the other hand, is stepping up and providing an awful lot of stuff at the moment. There's a new package that's come out, including this Skynex system, which is the latest that Rheinmetall have to offer in terms of air defense. Fires a whole bunch of lead into the sky. German government's just confirmed the delivery of one of the 2 Skynex air defense systems to Ukraine. Besides that, in terms of air defense, the delivery of 120 Iris-T missiles, 2 TRL TRML 4D air surveillance radars. I mean, they are pretty capable. And 30 drone detection sensors was confirmed. So this is all very good news. Skynex Systems, something I'm going to talk to German aid to Ukraine. So this Twitter handle, I'm hopefully going to reach out to him today, although it's a bit late already. It's past midday and I'm behind the curve. So anyway, the list of what is being given is fairly extensive, but also Rheinmetall have told Der Spiegel that a comprehensive spare parts package for the Leopard 2 A6 MBTs was ordered in December 23, which was financed by Germany. There's been a lot of talk about very slow schedule for fixing, repairing these tanks that are coming from the front line because there is the lack of ability of lack of spare parts. A contract has also been signed between the maintenance center operated by Rheinmetall and KMW and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense to improve the supply of spare parts in both Ukraine and Lithuania. So Lithuania has one of these repair facilities that's set up. So if we look at what the Germans are going to provide, or in terms of, well, there are two lists, and I don't quite know the difference here. So one of them is planning execution, and this is a delivery. So I don't know if this has been delivered. And this second stuff here is due to be delivered. Anyway, Germany's latest military aid delivery to Ukraine has been reported, and it has interesting newcomers. Here are the following items. So let's quickly go through some of this. Skynex air defense system with ammunitions. That's what we just saw a little bit of. 10 Marder I-1A3 infantry fighting vehicles, very useful. 2 Hensoldt TRML-4D air surveillance radar units. So that's 2 of the 4. I think there were 4 just mentioned. There's only 2 there. Don't know why there's a difference in that number. Undisclosed number of Iris-T SLM missiles. Undisclosed number of Leopard 2 ammunition. Artillery ammunition, 155mm, but only 9,000. 2 recent mine-clearing vehicles, 1 bridge-laying vehicle, 10 ground surveillance radars, 30 drone detection systems, helmets, 10 Zetros trucks, 3 truck tractors with 8x8 HX81 and additional semi-trailers, 34 various vehicles, trucks and minibuses, all-terrain vehicles, 305 assault rifles, small arms ammunition, a whole load of winter camouflage nets and camouflage ponchos, and then planning, in the planning stage is 4 Iris-T SLM air defense systems, another Skynex air defense system with ammunition, 8,000 anti-tank mines, 20 drone detection systems, 41 Mercedes trucks, a load of helmets, a load of rifles, and a load of small arms ammunition. And so that's really good. Germany stepping up. Obviously, there's still talk about Taurus, but they are stepping up. They are providing stuff on a consistent basis. They really are at the forefront of equipment provision to Ukraine. Every Ukrainian can assemble an FPV drone for the military on their own, according to Mikhailo Fedorov. So Mikhailo Fedorov, before the war began, was tasked with digital transformation. So he's in charge of transforming Ukraine into like a paperless society, into a digital society. So they've got really high goals set in terms of future-proofing the country, or at least they did have before the war started. And actually that's been continuing, and he's taken on this larger role in that kind of implementation, but in kind of a military context. And what you can do as a Ukrainian citizen, this goes again towards what I was saying in terms of drone provision for Ukraine and the advantage that Ukraine has over Russia in certain aspects of drone provision and drone training, etc., etc. Now, I talked about stats yesterday. It's interesting that Andrew Perpetua came out with a big sort of quite ranty thread about the amount of drone footage coming out of the Russian side, saying that actually there's a huge amount of drone footage coming out. And I was called out on this because I said that the stats suggest that the Russians don't have the 300,000 drones being made a month that are claimed by Russia, and that seems to be supported by the fact that there are far fewer hits on equipment, and there's sort of almost parity in terms of hits on infantry, and so there must be fewer drones being produced than is being claimed. But Andrew Perpetua then did a subsequent thread that said there's an awful lot of footage to show that the Russians use and this is interesting in itself, they use the drones for strikes on like trenches and dugouts and whatnot. And so they are using drones effectively as a replacement for artillery, it seems. So that's fascinating because actually, okay, so you might have more drones than was originally thought, but you're using them against lower value targets in a way that you would otherwise use artillery ammunition. Why are you not using artillery ammunition? So what does that say about artillery ammunition and artillery pieces? Maybe you don't have the pieces or the ammunition to be able to pummel this trench line, so you're using first-person view drones to hit these dugouts on the trench line. That's not a good thing. It's not. So yeah, they might have more drones than I was claiming yesterday, but as a result, it kind of verifies, I think, verifies that they have fewer artillery pieces or artillery ammunition than was thought. But also, this still, I don't think, supports the idea that they are producing 300,000 drones a month. That means in the last couple of months, there are 600,000 drones to be able to be utilized on the front line. Even with the amount of drone footage we're seeing hitting, dugouts and whatnot, that still doesn't support 600,000 drones or 300,000 a month. And so, although I might revise the amounts that I might have had in my head, my general thesis I don't think is incorrect still. So I know I was called out on one of my viewers for that. Anyway, to go back to this, anyone in Ukrainians can create their own drones. They just need to register via a portal. So this is, again, about making it a digital society. Pass the training, choose a drone to assemble, send it off for testing, and it's done. And what Ukraine are doing are facilitating Ukrainian citizens being able to help the war effort in a really organized manner, in a way I don't think that Russia is doing. So again, this is that they need to eke out every competitive advantage over Russia they can get, and that they can much more easily facilitate Ukrainians building drones and sending to the front line through a registry and training program. That's fantastic. The Ministry of the Interior in France estimates that the government financial contribution to Ukrainian refugees is $490 million euros over 1 year. Now, I'm going to go back to talk about funding, about NATO defense expenditure. And for those people, particularly sort of American naysayers, who might say, look at the rest of NATO, they aren't spending the 2% as 2% on defense that they need to reach the criteria for being in NATO. And actually, there are 11 countries that now do that. So there are far more countries that do that than previous. And we'll come on to find out that Poland is way ahead. Poland's like maybe as much as 4.2% of GDP on defense, which outstrips the US even. But anyway, aside from that, there are these grey areas of funding that concern war zones that you could, I know it's a stretch, but conceptually speaking, it's funding for the same thing. The funding is the defense of Ukraine. How do we help Ukraine to defend itself from the aggression of Russia? Well, we can buy loads of military equipment and put that through our budget, our defense spending budget, and then send that to Ukraine, and then go to NATO. Look, we are spending 2% on defense, and that's going to Ukraine. NATO is all about, supporting Ukraine here. But what about 490 million euros that France is spending on supporting refugees? That is, in effect, this larger abstract idea of defending Ukraine, supporting Ukraine. And you could argue the same in terms of supporting humanitarian, financial, commercial Ukrainian interests. Like, it's too simplistic, I think, to go, you're not spending 2% on defense, and therefore you guys suck and you shouldn't be in NATO, and we're carrying you in NATO. But there are many countries that are spending far more in other ways than some of these naysayers countries might be, and so it's just more complex as ever. So just don't think in terms in one track terms concerning, defense expenditure and NATO. There are other things countries are doing that are super, super important. Those countries closest to Ukraine are doing way more in terms of expenditure on refugees. And it's even more complex because those refugees then draw on education and healthcare and welfare state. Outside of your direct refugee funding, you'll also be spending more on those aspects of your budget. And so, yeah, everything's much more complex. Of course, France hosts fewer refugees than some EU countries like Germany. Of course, they're further away. However, this reflects less a lack of generosity on the part of the French than a desire for Ukrainians to seek refuge in neighbouring countries, as it says, or ones already hosting a strong diaspora, which has, for example, also pushed them to Israel. Integration through employment is also going well, despite some difficulties linked to the fact that many Ukrainian diplomas are not recognised in France. Okay. Ukraine has begun testing a D-2111 ground unmanned robot, which can conduct reconnaissance as well as defend or storm positions. This was announced by Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov. He's a busy man. Also, according to Fedorov, the platform can be used to safely deliver ammunition or provisions to fight a hotspot. So it's basically a ground drone that can drive from A to B. What you put on it, whether you put supplies or a mounted gun, is up to you. I mean, I guess it's kind of modular like that and therefore pretty useful. Right, State Department. US may not continue supporting Ukraine at the level of 2022 or 2023. I think the US is gearing up for a very tough year in terms of campaigning, political campaigning, and getting aid to Ukraine. And so they're just saying up front, yeah, we ain't going to do what we did in 2022 and 2023. We might do, but we might not. US is committed, so they have recommitted to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. But of course, it's going to take even longer if you can't commit as much as you did initially in a subsequent year. That's how I'd interpret that. Putin has signed a decree on granting Russian citizenship to foreigners who have entered into a contract for military service in the Russian armed forces. Family members of military personnel will also receive citizenship. Interesting. So they really are trying to do that crypto mobilization. And the Rostec, the defense manufacturing concern for the Russians, the state concern, says that the first finished models of the Koalitsia self-propelled howitzer were delivered to the Russian military in 2023. It's entered serial production. So this is a bit of a worry for Ukraine. They are still producing new stuff. However, this is a bit of a rehash. I think it operates on the old T90 engine. I think there are elements, not too sure that this is a particularly great bit of kit. It's a pretty heavy self-propelled gun. I mean, it's a new bit of kit. So let's have a look. Yeah, T90 engine. So lots of people fairly critical of that, but they are still, producing new things. Okay, we're going to have a quick synopsis, recap on what's gone on with North Korean ballistic missiles that Russia have sent into Ukraine. So a Ukrainian Telegram channel, Colonel of the General Staff, has posted images of missile wreckage claimed that to be recovered following a Russian raid against Kharkiv. There's also against Zaporizhia. The exhaust vane configuration appears to be consistent with North Korean KN-23 rather than Iskander-M. So it appears that Russia are using North Korean. I think there's at least 2 cases of North Korean ballistic missiles being used. This has then prompted your man John Kirby, the Security Council, to say a number of things concerning this in a press briefing last night.
Russia has become increasingly isolated on the world stage, and they've been forced to look to like-minded states for military equipment. As we've been warning publicly, one of those states is North Korea. Our information indicates that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea recently provided Russia with ballistic missile launchers and several ballistic missiles. On the 30th of December 2023, Russian forces launched at least one of these North Korean ballistic missiles into Ukraine. This missile appears to have landed in an open field in the Zaporizhia region. And on January 2nd, Russia launched multiple North Korean ballistic missiles into Ukraine, including as part of its overnight aerial attack. In return for its support, we assess that Pyongyang is seeking military assistance from Russia, including fighter aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, armored vehicles, ballistic missile production equipment or materials, and other advanced technologies.
So actually, that's at least 3 missiles, to be honest. And yeah, lots to be said about this. These missiles have a range of almost 900 kilometers. And as you heard, they're getting something in return for that. Of course, we know that North Korea has been supplying. There's over 1,000 containers of military equipment have been supplied, and that continues. So they are getting an awful lot of kit. So as well as those North Korean artillery shells, it also appears that ballistic missiles are being delivered. Now, this is hugely problematic for a whole bunch of reasons, but let's just quickly return to John Kirby in that.
In response to Russia's activities with Iran and North Korea, we are taking a range of steps with our allies and our partners. First, Russia's procurement of ballistic missiles from the DPRK directly violates multiple UN Security Council resolutions.
We'll return to that. Super important.
We will raise these arms deals at the UN Security Council alongside our allies and partners, and we will demand that Russia be held accountable for, yet again, violating its international obligations.
I'm going to pop to that now. So, as someone on my thread yesterday said, it does indeed do that, and also there's a law on the ban of selling ballistic missiles with a range of greater than 399 kilometers. We talked about that in terms of the export licensing for missiles. So the Storm Shadows, but it looks like they aren't the export variants of the Storm Shadows that were given to Ukraine, but the UK and French versions from their own stocks. Now, with regard to the UN Security Council, Russia's latest escalation in procuring and even using North Korean missiles emphasizes once again the treaties and agreements with Russia are not worth the paper they are written on. This is a case in particular shows that brazenly. Okay, so UN Security Council Resolution 1718 explicitly forbids North Korea from importing and exporting of all sorts of stuff, but including missiles and missile systems. I have added the section of Resolution UNSC, Resolution 1718, October 14th, 2006, has been agreed upon unanimously. Yes, even Russia agreed upon this because they couldn't imagine back then to epically fail so that they would need to import weapons and ammunition from North Korea. UNSC Resolution 1718 has been extended and reaffirmed twice in March 2016 and 2018. What does this tell us? First of all, that the UN and the UNSC Security Council in particular are worthless. Well, this is hardly breaking news, but it's worth pointing out that and as long as Russia sits on the UNSC, this council is inherently broken and needs to be disbanded. The upcoming UNSC meeting on January the 10th, you can forget, but that is a topic for another day. I wonder whether there can be a process started whereby, and I know W. Bin is a commenter on my thread that has been advocating this for a long time, and I agree that Russia needs to be taken off that Security Council committee, or the Security Council. There is an argument to say they don't even deserve to be on it because it was actually USSR that sat on it, and so there isn't this. It was assumed by Russia that they could just take over that seat, but nothing formally took place. And actually, it could be any other element of the former Soviet Union, including Ukraine. So Ukraine could have that seat. Why is it Russia? So, they don't even technically deserve to be on it. And I wonder whether that meeting on the 10th might see them be thrown off it, or might see a procedure started for that. More importantly is the fact that Russia repeatedly violates its own agreements whenever necessary. Nothing that is agreed with Russia can be taken for granted. Treaties and agreements are for the Kremlin's sole means to keep enemies at bay, but once the time is right, the treaties and agreements get torn apart. It happened with the Budapest Memorandum, indeed, and countless other agreements. The UNSC Resolution 1718 is only the latest proof. In reference to Putin, Russia, we are dealing with a deeply uncivilized and imperial thinking country which only understands a language of absolute violence. I also want to crush all hopes of if anyone thinks that Putin would change his mind. He will not, he cannot, not even when we destroy another million Russians, because he made the decision for himself, and this is his last fight. For him, it is about making history in the manner of all Russian emperors, and he will not settle with a half-hearted ceasefire. He cannot, because this is too grand. He will order to fight until his beloved Russian Empire is restored, or somebody puts a 9mm bullet between his eyes, whatever comes first. Okay, so on and so forth. Now, that is, I think it's really interesting that they have violated those Security Council agreements. And now the United States has convened the UN Security Council due to the supply of those missiles to Russia from North Korea. And Ukraine's permanent representative to the UN, Sergei Kieslitsia, had said, so the meeting will take place on the 10th. So that is one reaction. What else is the US doing?
Second, we will impose additional sanctions against those working to facilitate arms transfers between Russia and the DPRK and between Russia and Iran.
Because there's also, and he talked earlier in this briefing, that Iran, they don't think they've given them or sold them any missiles yet, but there are plans afoot to get similar ballistic missiles from Iran.
Third, we will continue to release information to the public and expose these arms deals, as we are doing today, because we will not allow countries to aid Russia's war machine in secret. But here's the bottom line. The most effective response to Russia's horrific violence against the Ukrainian people is to continue to provide Ukraine with vital air defense capabilities and other types of military equipment. To do that, we need Congress to approve our supplemental funding request for Ukraine without...
So then he goes on to say, but the main thing we need to do is get that bloody assistance package sorted for Ukraine. And he's right, but I'd like to see, I mean, it's good that they are convening that meeting, and there will be other things put in place like sanctions. This is huge, though. Russia should be thrown off the United Nations Security Council. I mean, it should have been already. This is another very strong piece of justification for that happening. And I think, well, it's dangerous if the US take the lead on that, because then it's going to be Cold War 2.0. But I think the rest of the United Nations Security Council members should be really pushing for that to happen for Russia. I mean, this is gone too far. And then also any fears of escalation, any escalation naysayers that say, oh, the US or any other nation shouldn't provide ATACMS or longer range missiles. Hey, that ship has left port now, right? The North Koreans have provided long-range ballistic missiles for a 900-kilometer range to Russia, and in so doing have shown that actually this axis of evil is a set of friends that are far more reliable than many Western nations appear to be with Ukraine. We all need to step up. We need to step up consistently, because at the moment, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are taking the piss. 460 kilometers, says War Translator. So this was the distance that the missiles were thought to have traveled, although they have a greater range. While Ukraine has been asking for anything that even comes close to this range for years now, Russia has better allies, it seems. What a joke. So people are really disappointed with this. As I read last night, Darren Masako does a really good analysis. Russia launched missiles from the DPRK up to 460 kilometers into Ukraine. Looking at that range, when the max range for the system is 900 kilometers, I have some working theories on Russian thinking on precedents or norms for externally provided missile use, but I will wait to see what else is released. Without knowing ranges of other strikes from this system, it is too soon to interpret the significance of that range. Was this a misfire? Was it landed in an empty field? Should it have gone further? Deliberately lofting of the missile so it's more up and down as opposed to getting the full 900 kilometer range. You want it to come up and down, more kinetic force, so most of that range is taken up with the fuel is spent getting to a higher altitude so it can come down more quickly, and all these other kind of theories, effective versus maximum kinetic range, targeting choice, so on and so forth. Storm Shadow, Scald, and ATACMS have less range than this 460 kilometer launch. 460 kilometers is below the 500 kilometer range of the Taurus missile. Not enough info yet to know if that was a deliberate move by the Russians, but they do think in these kind of terms. Western decisions should be independent of that anyway. So at a minimum, the Russians have set a new precedent for externally provided missiles in this war at ranges of 460 kilometers. Perhaps now declassified analysis comes out that launch ranges were well beyond 500 kilometers, and if so, I'll update that. So, as Mick Ryan says, the arsenal of authoritarians encompassing Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea takes another step forward in its development. Here's hoping that 2024 sees a better response to this from Western politicians than the rather limp efforts so far. And, it has broken those UN Security Council agreements. Something needs to be done in response. Now, speaking of North Korea, news has come out today that they have fired more than 200 shells towards South Korea's Yeonpyeong and Byangyeong Islands in the Yellow Sea. So these are islands that sit in a kind of bit of a grey zone between North and South Korea. South Korea has now evacuated, it's announced evacuation of residents from 2 of these islands. So things there are going south, it seems. That's probably the wrong metaphor, but there are issues between these 2 nations that is going to make things even more complicated. It might not be. There's some claims that actually it was due to not necessarily claims that they have fired shells, but they were threatening to fire shells if South Korea were going to do live fire activities, live fire practices. So either way, things are hotting up in North Korea and South Korea. This has happened periodically before, but it's another iteration. I think South Korea have got really good rationale to help Ukraine out far more explicitly. Now, I'm going to play you this. This is connected to Nikki Haley very explicitly. So I'm going to show you a bit of what Nikki Haley said yesterday, which I think is good messaging. So she's running for president in the Republican Party, but she's against Trump. Trump is likely to get it on polling at the moment. However, he has some serious legal issues to contend with. Here is a Republican who is pro-Haley. Listen to what he says. If you're really pro-Trump, you're not going to like the beginning bit, but the end bit is really important as well regarding Haley.
Polls show Donald Trump will likely be the Republican nominee. If that is the case, will you support whoever the nominee were?
No, I wouldn't support Donald Trump. I voted for Joe Biden last time. I would do the same again if that were the race. Yeah.
Is there something Donald Trump could do to win over your support from Biden if that were the eventual case?
Not at this point.
Absolutely. Is there something he did to especially sour you from him?
There are a lot of things. That's a tough one to answer, but January 6th in particular, I think this is an election about democracy, and I would ultimately choose democracy over political issues, even though I probably align more with him on a lot of the issues.
One last thing I wanted to ask you. There are some rumors that Nikki Haley may be his VP pick. In that case, what would you think, and could you support him if she was his VP?
I wouldn't support him under any circumstance, and I would say the likelihood of her being his VP I think is really low. Tucker Carlson and a whole bunch of the right-wing media is already 100% against this. I don't see him doing it. I think her support of Ukraine is critical. It's probably the top issue of the election for me is on foreign policy at this point, on deficit reduction. I think she's miles ahead of Donald Trump on both.
Absolutely. I know actually in the Republican Party, support for Ukraine is kind of divided 50-50. She's made the case for Ukraine out here today. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you think about the Republican Party being kind of split on this issue?
I think she's 100% right. The invasion of Ukraine is wrong, it's divisive, it's unethical, and she stands on the right side of history.
I absolutely love what he said at the end there. It's just so on point. You've got to be on the right side of history. And indeed, this is what Nikki Haley said. She said an awful lot of stuff before that, or a bunch of stuff before that was also really good about how just, Putin's invasion was just downright wrong and, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm joining it here where she's talking about the messaging about this.
Now, for any of you that say, why should we care about Ukraine? That's a legitimate question for you to ask. The problem is no one's giving you the answer. I'm going to give you the answer.
Really sorry that this is quite low. You're going to have to turn it up.
Because every day at the United Nations, I saw terrorists, tyrants, and thugs are actually very transparent. They're amazingly transparent. They always tell us what they're going to do. Hamas said they were going to go into Israel. China said they were going to take Hong Kong. Both those things happened. Russia said they were going to invade Ukraine. We watched it.
Taiwan.
China said Taiwan is next. We better believe them. Russia said once they take Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. Those are NATO countries. That puts America at war. This is about preventing war. It's always been about preventing war. And we know Putin's hit rock bottom. We know that because he's lost 87% of the troops that he started the war with. You should.
So that is really good messaging. I mean, she was wrong about Hong Kong, but other than that, I mean, actually, no, I lived there. We had a 99-year lease of Hong Kong, and it was the end of the lease, and we gave it back to China, despite the Hong Kong Chinese not wanting that to happen, and really we didn't want it to happen, but it was kind of, we fulfilled our agreement. But other than that, she's completely right with what was said. And this is really good messaging, which is picking up on the really poor messaging of the Biden administration for most of this war. They've picked up the messaging at the moment, but I still don't know whether it's getting through enough. And really, unfortunately, that messaging is getting drowned out by what's going on in Congress at the moment. Right. Poland's military spending, as I've mentioned, is perhaps as high as 4.2% of GDP. There is a bit of a range, but the top end is 4.2%. The military will receive $40 billion US, of which 56% will be allocated for equipment, modernization, and purchases of new weapons systems. I mean, it is a wonder where a lot of this funding is going to come from, but you could also see it as a stimulus, since a lot of this will be involved in purchasing of stuff that can be built under license in Poland. But they are also buying a lot of stuff like HIMARS and things from the US, and so it's good for the US, right? But yeah, the idea that there are all European countries or all NATO allies outside of the US are not fulfilling the 2% criteria is just wrong. As I said, 11 of them are now. Poland, very much one of them. It's now official. 2,000 trucks are waiting in line at the Polish border to enter Ukraine. So this has now started up again. Border Guard Service spokesman Andrei Demchenko said that 4 border crossings between Poland and Ukraine were blocked as of this morning. That's a real challenge. Right, we're going to go back to Serbia again. This is really concerning. Reportedly, the Serbian intelligence is going after Vucic's opposition. As I said earlier today, says Ivana Stradner, in 2024, Serbia will either become Belarus or a civilized European country. The Serbian government is becoming increasingly nervous, so things are looking very authoritarian and not very nice there. After having been beaten by Serbian Secret Service, BIA, opposition politician Sandulovic is now having his house searched by the police. As per the warrant below, Sandulovic is suspected to have incited national hatred. What's he done? As he placed flowers on the Albanian graves in Kosovo. So that gets him beaten up and having his house searched. So this is him actually post being beaten up. So shocking footage of Serbia's opposition politician Sandulovic being released from hospital. As per his wife's account, he was kidnapped and beaten in the premises of Serbia's intelligence agency BIA by Radojcic and other perpetrators of the Banjska attack. So this is not cool. Serbia is going backwards. This radical escalation is repression by the Vucic regime. It is now absolutely imperative for the EU and US to categorically shift their pro-regime appeasement posture. In other words, let's stop cozying up to Vucic and tell him exactly what for. But again, as I said yesterday, this is a really delicate situation, because if you start being overly harsh on Vucic and demanding a recount in the election because of vote rigging, then that might send him into an entrenched authoritarian position and running to Russia. So it's a really, I mean, the right thing to do is to call him out and support the protests, but in so doing, you might accidentally, law of unintended consequences, bring about the opposite of what you would like. Serbia's EU enlargement process should be immediately frozen and sanctions for Vucic himself imposed. So there are some people calling for very strong retaliation to this, ramifications for what is widely seen as a vote-rigged election in Serbia. Right, Russia is facing problems in oil exports due to US sanctions, according to Bloomberg. In the past month, a total of 14 tankers carrying oil to India have either been stopped or turned around or disabled the equipment that tells digital tracking systems their location. So either they're doing it anyway, but on the quiet, or they are stopped or turned around, which is good news. Indeed, when you go to Joe Bloggs' last couple of video offerings, one of them is about the value of Russian reserves crashing. That's gas reserves, not monetary reserves, as far as I understand. So they are failing to sell or to export gas, in gas form, natural gas, in gas form through pipelines because Nord Stream pipeline is no longer to Europe, and so to pick up that slack, they need to sell gas to other places like China, but they don't have the pipe infrastructure to do that, so they can't do that, and they don't have the gas infrastructure to turn it into liquefied natural gas, not the amounts that they need to compensate for the lack of European export gas. And so they're in trouble. So their gas reserves are therefore less valuable. They are not making the money. And then you've got, sanctions and caps and all these other things that come into play as well. Not only that, but their oil exports to India are collapsing. And this is like a triple whammy because one, as I've said before, they've cut oil production in line with OPEC because that will hopefully for them push up the price of oil because the oil's come right down. So they need to get more money for their oil. It's this balancing act because they will sell fewer barrels, but hopefully sell it at each barrel at much higher, and that kind of one will overcompensate for the other. However, at the same time as cutting oil production in line with OPEC to the tune of 850,000 barrels a day, I believe, the US is flooding the market with oil to kind of compensate, to mitigate this production cut, to mitigate against oil prices rising, and that's keeping oil prices low. So that's really good for inflation and energy inflation. So this is a way that US is trying to manage inflation in its own country, but also it's trying to hit Russia where it hurts, which means that Russia is now producing 850,000 fewer barrels a day, and they are not getting higher prices for that. So they are just basically being hammered. And then the US has put pressure on India and saying, don't you go buying Russian oil. So India is then turning some of these ships away. So then oil exports to India are collapsing, which they need because they're being sanctioned all over the place in these other areas. So this is like a triple whammy for Russia. Now, the question is, what effect will this have on the Russian economy? Will this have a major effect? Now, I'm going to leave you with talk about the Russian Wealth Fund, the National Wealth Fund. What is that? Well, there were two funds that were sorted out for reserves. One was a reserve fund and one was a National Wealth Fund. So these were investments abroad in low yield securities. That was the reserve fund. And used when oil and gas incomes fell, right? So if your oil and gas incomes fall, you use a reserve fund. And then you've got the National Wealth Fund, which invests in riskier, higher return vehicles, as well as federal budget expenditures. Okay, but the reserve fund ran out in 2017. So when oil and gas revenues drop, you dip into that's gone. So now you've only got the you do have gold and other things and whatnot, but the National Wealth Fund is being dipped into consistently, and it's the sole reserve fund. Now, according to the Russians, if you look at what the Russians officially say, they say the latest one in December 2023 is that they have $150 billion worth in that fund, right? But it's not quite as obvious as that. So Russia's last remaining reserve of cash is its sovereign wealth fund, the National Welfare Fund. According to official statistics, it contains 145 billion, says Moscow Times back in November. So I think latest was about 150, but whatever, 145, 150 billion. But this is double counted with the international currency reserves, making the extent to which the remaining assets are liquid unclear. At the end of September, Russian Finance Minister Anton Siluanov said the state would borrow $42 billion this year and that only $69 billion would be left in the National Welfare Fund, which sounds plausible. And someone on my thread yesterday was saying inside Russia, the channel, the exiled Russian chap that runs that pretty big channel, was saying that the sovereign wealth fund only has $43 billion left in it. Now, if it only has $43 billion left in it, those cash reserves of Russia are very, very low, comparatively speaking. And this is a real challenge for the Russian economy as they use that to prop up the ruble and all these other things. Well, actually, how long can you continue to do that? Will the Russian economy get to a point where the Kremlin can't do anything else to prop it up, and it just starts falling apart in a more fundamental way. And then will we get to this point where they are unable to support the war effort? Now, some viewers out there and some cynical analysts are saying that actually the US is only drip feeding stuff to Ukraine such that this happens. Like, if you drip feed Ukraine stuff so they can keep defending, but they can't like stop this war by winning it outright, then what you're doing is you're draining Russia's ability to survive as a nation going forward. Like, if they're much more, so if Ukraine won this war a year ago on the battlefield, if they militarily won this war because NATO forces gave them everything they needed right away, that wouldn't have caused Russia to have dipped into their reserves and had their, all other aspects of their economy get absolutely hammered. But there is this cynical, almost conspiracy theory, but I don't know. There is some good rationale. Lloyd Austin in April last year talked about how they want to degrade Russia so fundamentally they can't do this again. And this is exactly what this theory sets out, which is that Russia's reserves get hammered, everything is degraded on such a long-term basis that it would take like 50 years to 25 years or whatever to come back from this. That could be why there's this drip feeding. I don't know. I'll let you conclude on that. On the other side, the Ukrainian economy minister has said that Ukraine's exports have grown by 9% in 2024, and that's going to be largely down to that grain route down the western coastline of the Black Sea that is now operating at a pretty decent level, such that obviously their exports are going to be going from a much lower 2023 rate due to the war. So it's not like this is an increase from the pre-war numbers, but this is moving in the right direction if exports are growing by 9%. So there you go. Anyway, let me know what you think about this. Sorry, this was a long one. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.